Imagine writing the code for an iPhone in 1843. Imagine conceiving of digital music, computer-generated art, and artificial intelligence a full century before the first electronic computer even flickered to life. This sounds like science fiction, but it was the reality for one woman who saw our modern world in the gears of a Victorian machine. We've been told the fathers of computing were men of the 20th century, but the historical record shows us a different origin story. This is the story of her rebellion. Now, let's uncover how she defied her world. Augusta Ada Byron, born in 1815, was a prisoner of her own bloodline. She was the only legitimate child of Lord Byron, the rock star poet of his age, a man infamous for his scandalous affairs and romantic excesses. He abandoned her in infancy, but his shadow loomed large. Her mother, Annabella Milbanke, a gifted mathematician herself, lived in mortal terror that Ada would inherit her father's poetic madness. To combat this perceived threat, she forged a cage of pure reason. While other aristocratic girls were taught needlepoint and watercolors, Ada was subjected to a grueling curriculum of mathematics and logic designed to exterminate every last trace of her father's imaginative spirit. What this reveals, when we examine her mother's letters and the curriculum she designed, is a systematic attempt to suppress a child's nature. It was an intellectual exorcism, but the system failed. Ada's genius wasn't in choosing logic over imagination. It was in fusing them together. She privately called her method poetical science, an ability to see the abstract beauty and the hidden connections within the rigid world of numbers. This was her first, quiet act of defiance, refusing to believe that art and science were at war. Her world cracked open in 1833. At 17, Ada was introduced to the brilliant, irascible inventor Charles Babbage. In a crowded London salon, Babbage was demonstrating a fragment of his difference engine, a colossal brass contraption of whirring gears designed to calculate mathematical tables. While others saw a clever calculator, a marvel of engineering, Ada saw a revolution. Babbage spoke of a far more ambitious project, a theoretical machine called the Analytical Engine, a programmable device that could execute any command given to it. For society, it was an eccentric fantasy. For Ada Lovelace, it was a destiny. She had found a canvas vast enough for her vision. The collaboration between Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage ignited their correspondence, which we can still study today, crackles with intellectual energy. A frenetic exchange of mathematical proofs, mechanical diagrams, and philosophical inquiries. This was not a mentorship. It was a partnership of equals. While the British government dismissed Babbage as a crank and refused to fund his analytical engine, Ada saw its soul. She understood, perhaps even better than Babbage himself, that he hadn't just designed a better calculator. He had stumbled upon a new dimension of human potential. Her opportunity to prove it came from an unlikely source. In 1842, an Italian military engineer named Luigi Menabrea published a scholarly article in French describing the analytical engine. Ada was asked to translate it for a British scientific journal. For a woman of her era, this was a respectable, scholarly task, a quiet contribution made from the sidelines. But Ada Lovelace did not do anything quietly. Defiance was in her blood. She didn't just translate the paper, she appropriated it. At Babbage's encouragement, she decided to add her own appendix, a series of annotations she simply called the notes. This is where the historical record presents us with an act of pure, verifiable badassery. Her translation exploded, becoming 3 times the length of the original article. The notes, labeled A through G, were not a mere explanation of Babbage's machine. They were a visionary manifesto for the future of technology. In them, she systematically deconstructed the very concept of a machine. She was the first person to articulate that the analytical engine's power was not in its ability to handle numbers, but its ability to manipulate symbols. This is the foundational concept of all modern computing. She wrote, with astonishing foresight, that if you could encode other forms of information, words, images, musical notes, into a symbolic language, the machine could process them. She explicitly prophesied that a device like the analytical engine could one day be used to compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music. Think about that. In an age of steam and gaslight, she was describing the fundamental principle behind everything, from digital music production to graphic design. Babbage had invented a computer. Ada Lovelace was the one who saw that it could change the world. The climax of her work, the ultimate proof of her genius, is found in the final section. Note G. Skeptics have tried to diminish her role, painting her as a mere publicist for Babbage. Note G obliterates that myth. In it, Ada writes out, in meticulous, step-by-step detail, a complete plan for the analytical engine to calculate a complex sequence known as the Bernoulli numbers. What she created was a chart of operations, a sequence of instructions, a method for the machine to execute a task it had never been designed for. It is, by any modern definition, the world's first computer program.
Analytical Engine.
This was not a theoretical musing. It was a tangible, executable algorithm written for a machine that did not yet exist. The sheer intellectual audacity is staggering. She was writing software for hardware that was still just a blueprint, proving the universal capability of the machine before a single gear had been forged. She had published a work of staggering genius. The notes were out in the world, a blueprint for the digital age bound in a scientific journal. And the world responded with a deafening silence. The scientific establishment of the 1,840 seconds was simply not equipped to understand what she had done. Babbage's engine was never built, a casualty of failed funding and political infighting. Her revolutionary program had no machine to run on, her prophecy no audience to hear it. The unjust system she was born into had the final word. Her work was dismissed as an eccentric woman's footnote to a failed project. Frail and frequently ill, Ada Lovelace died of cancer in 1852. She was only 36 years old, the very same age as the poet father she never knew. Her legacy, it seemed, was destined to be a forgotten curiosity. For 100 years, it was. Her name faded into obscurity, a footnote in the biography of a more famous man. But history has a long memory. As the 20th century dawned and humanity began wrestling with the very concepts Lovelace had mastered, her work was rediscovered. When we look at the foundational documents of the computer age, we find her ghost in the machine. Alan Turing, the brilliant mind who broke the Enigma code and helped formalize the concepts of algorithm and computation, referenced Lovelace's notes in the 1940 seconds. He saw what her contemporaries had missed. This wasn't just a commentary. It was a work of profound, predictive genius. Suddenly, her vision snapped into focus. The symbolic logic she described was the bedrock of all programming languages. Her idea that a machine could create music and art was the guiding spirit of digital creativity. Her algorithm, Note G, was a direct ancestor to the code that would one day take humanity to the moon and connect billions of people on a worldwide web. The recognition, a century late, was definitive. In 1980, the United States Department of Defense, seeking a powerful and reliable language for its military systems, named their new creation Ada. The name of the forgotten prophet was now stamped onto the very architecture of the modern world. She had defied the cage her mother built, the expectations of her society, and even the limits of her own time. Ada Lovelace's story is a thunderous testament to the power of seeing what isn't there yet. Her rebellion was not fought with swords or speeches, but with intellect and imagination. She reminds us that the future is not something that simply happens, but something that must be envisioned. These are the stories we cannot afford to forget, the blueprints for a better, bolder world.